On this episode of China Uncensored, the president of the international crime fighting force Interpol has resigned after getting disappeared in China. Hi, welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm your host, Chris Chappell. The International Criminal Police Organization, or Interpol. It's the world's largest international police organization with 192 member countries. Sounds impressive, but what does Interpol actually do? It's like a global FBI, but with one important difference. They don't actually have the power to make actual arrests. As you may have learned from Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, Interpol coordinates international law enforcement activities, but they don't actually make arrests. They get local police to do the hands-on stuff. For example, the real Interpol coordinates efforts across multiple jurisdictions to fight ivory poachers in Africa, or help catch murder suspects with some unfortunate face tattoos, who may be trying to flee across international borders. They issue a number of color-coded notices. Red is bad. It's the closest thing to an international arrest warrant, and they do sometimes get their man, like Tristan J. Amaro, a mentally deranged terror suspect in multiple bombings in Bolivia who described himself as both a vampire and the Superman of losers. Sorry, Amaro. That's Tommy Wiseau. So when the president of Interpol, Meng Hongwei, vanished without a trace a few weeks ago while on a visit to China, speculation ran rampant that a nefarious crime syndicate with global reach had turned the tables on Interpol to get their man. But now it turns out that Meng Hongwei, who happens to be a Chinese national, was abducted by none other than the Chinese Communist Party. So, a nefarious crime syndicate with global reach did get their man. Although, let's be honest, they don't look as good in a fedora. China's Central Commission for Discipline Inspection, the party's watchdog against graft and political disloyalty, said in a statement on Sunday that Meng had been arrested in China and was being investigated on suspicion of violating the law. China's Ministry of Public Security said the investigation against Meng Hongwei taking bribes and suspected violations of law is very timely, absolutely correct, and rather wise. Interestingly, Meng had a second job, Vice Minister of Public Security in China. I guess not anymore. Meng was also linked to disgraced former security czar and meat space swamp Zhou Yangkang. He's now in prison for embezzling $300 million. He got a life sentence, and worst of all, they won't let him keep his black hair dye in prison. In fact, the Ministry of Public Security specifically said that the investigation of Meng was needed to utterly rectify the poisoned stream of influence brought by Zhou Yangkang. Viewers of my favorite soap opera, General Hostilities, may remember that Zhou Yangkang was a big part of the faction led by former Chinese leader and mummified toad, Jiang Zemin. His faction is locked in a power struggle with current leader Xi Jinping. So it looks like Meng probably had some shady things going on. Not great for the head of an international crime-fighting task force. But even more embarrassing is that the Chinese Communist Party arrested one of the few Chinese nationals who hold important positions in international organizations. Back in 2016, Meng became the first ever Chinese national chosen as president of Interpol. His election was viewed as a success for China's ambitions to gain influence in international organizations. The Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs said at the time it was a sign that China was ready to take on a bigger responsibility and make greater contribution to push for global law enforcement. And then they had to go and spoil it all with the secret arrest. Reinforcing the view that China may not be ready to lead important international organizations is the fact that for nearly 2 weeks after Meng disappeared while on a trip to China, the Chinese Communist Party refused to admit they had arrested him, even when Interpol made a formal request for information about what happened to their boss. It seems what may have prompted Chinese authorities to fess up was when Meng's wife held a tearful press conference on October 7th in Lyon, France, where Interpol is headquartered. That's her in the middle, with her back to the cameras. She said she's been threatened, and French police have placed her and her kids under protective custody. She told reporters she was speaking out on behalf of all the wives and children so that their husbands and fathers will no longer disappear. She showed them the last message she received from him, a "wait for my call" text along with a creepy knife emoji. At first, I assumed it meant, "I'll be bringing back the most amazing set of steak knives." But Meng's wife later said that the knife was their code for danger, which is pretty intense. My code for danger is just a panda emoji. It's led to some confusion. Anyway, after 12 days of silence following creepy knife emoji, Interpol tweeted that it had received Meng's resignation with immediate effect, and that Interpol now has a new acting president, Kim Jong-yang. He's from South Korea. Actually, what I'd like to know is, how did a senior official from China's Ministry of Public Security get the respectable job of Interpol president in the first place? After all, the ministry is notorious for arresting Chinese dissidents without a warrant, often detaining them for long periods in black jails, which I'm pretty sure is not the way an international police force is supposed to operate. China's foreign ministry said on Monday that China would continue to provide support for Interpol's work. But I wonder whether Interpol is really all that keen to take them up on the offer. Because if it turns out the Chinese Communist Party feels entitled to detain the president of Interpol on a whim and not bother to tell anybody about it for 12 days, you gotta wonder, are they really the kind of partner you want to have in international law enforcement? Professor Julian Ku, a specialist in China's relationship with international law, told the New York Times that while Meng's appointment 2 years ago was a sign of China's international presence and growing influence, the fact that Meng was disappeared without any notice to Interpol will undermine China's global outreach effort. He said, "It is hard to imagine another international organization feeling comfortable placing a Chinese national in charge without feeling nervous that this might happen again." And if Chinese authorities can do this to prominent people like the head of the international police, or to Chinese superstar actress Fan Bingbing, who went missing for 3 months and reappeared with $130 million in fines and back taxes, along with a deep apology to the Communist Party, what it really means is that when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party, nobody's safe. Especially in a case like Meng Hongwei's, where his arrest is likely related to the power struggle going on within the Chinese Communist Party. So what do you think about the president of Interpol getting disappeared by the CCP without notice or notification? Leave your comments below. And now, it's time for me to answer a question from you, a fan who supports China Uncensored with $1 or more per episode on the crowdfunding website Patreon. Trung Nguyen asks, "Chris, is this your official channel China Uncensored in Vietnamese?" Ah, you've found my Vietnamese doppelganger. He looks like me, but sounds like a Vietnamese woman.
Tặng cho Tập Cận Bình một tấm vé xem một màn trình diễn vũ khí.
It is an official channel. Many years ago, they started uploading content about China from several different YouTube channels. Now, it's mostly just China Uncensored. I gave them permission under one condition, that they make me sound awesome in Vietnamese. My most popular episode on that channel is the one about Mao Zedong's Crystal Mausoleum. It got 2 million views, which is way more than it got in English. I don't know how to explain that. Thanks for your question, Trung. And thank all of you who support China Uncensored on the crowdfunding website Patreon. And if you don't support the show yet, click the link below. This show relies on you. And as I always say,
Một lần nữa tôi là Chris Chapel. Hẹn gặp lại các bạn lần tới.
I know you can't get enough of China Uncensored. Well, it's your support that allows us to produce 3 to 4 episodes per week on YouTube and do a half-hour TV broadcast. So click this orange button to visit patreon.com/China Uncensored and learn how you can make a difference.